It's not every day that we see policemen writing books. And if I were to expect a book from my dear friend, Mr. Brijesh Singh, I would have expected it on artificial intelligence or cyber security, as he is one of the foremost experts on cyber security in this country. However, strangely enough, he has written a historical book with the name of The Cloud Chariot. Why this book and why now, Mr. Brijesh Singh? Sure. Welcome to NDTV, by the way.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks for talking to me. Nikunj, in fact, this is my third book. But this is published third, but this was written first. So it was waiting for publication for many years. This stems from my deep interest in history and culture. This book came to address a need that we did not have reference to our culture. When I kind of looked at our historical and cultural continuity, I found that there are gaps. Even in my own view, there were gaps. Maybe it is the way history has been taught to us, or it has been construed or constructed. But I felt that there were gaping holes in history, which needed to be studied and filled.
Gaping holes in Indian history? Or the periods of Indian history, you mean to say, have not been properly documented for consumption of future generations?
Both things. So if you look at the way history has been told to us, all our preliminary historical sources came through the British. And there was so much of a cultural discontinuity that when the Ashokan pillars were found in Delhi, the British collected all knowledgeable people from everywhere. But there was nobody who could read Brahmi, Kharoshti, Aramaic. Nobody could read them. It was a British soldier, Prinsep, who basically read and deciphered this. So after this, if you go to Cunningham, go to discoveries about Ashoka, everywhere the British tried to tell us that we were secondary, all our architecture was from Persepolis, or all our idols, they were basically Greco-Roman and things like that. And this kind of a narrative in history is another gap. Apart from that, when we were taught history, there is a kind of focus which is due to various reasons, probably very Delhi-centric. And there are glorious empires. So Satavahanas, if you look at that. Satavahan is, near Paitan in Maharashtra, near Aurangabad. You see Ajanta and Ellora caves. It was a glorious empire for 700 years, one of the most glorious empires in the world. But nobody talks about them. Probably our children don't know much about them. Similarly, the empire I have written about, the Mahameghavanas, hence the cloud chariot. It's a glorious empire, but generally this does not find much mention in the books of history, not much more than probably a chapter or a para. So these things need to be talked about. We need to examine and explore our vast cultural continuity, because we are a living civilization. Look at any other civilization, look at the Egyptians, they have forgotten. Look at the Greeks and Romans, they have forgotten, except some parts of their architecture, which most of Europe copies and US copies. But we are, like Varanasi, is a living city for more than 5,000 years. So we have this, continuous stream of consciousness running through us. But there are gaps in it which need to be explored. We need to shine light upon them, and we need to reabsorb them into our own being.
Question is that the need for such a book, or need for books on various such dark holes or chapters of our history would have existed. Why did you choose to write now? I mean, why did you think that it's a time that one should pick it up? Was it something that struck you somewhere, or was it that this is a period about which there is a complete darkness and hence some light needs to be shone upon it?
Nikunj, almost all of this. So it actually started the way I'm discussing with you. It started, with a discussion with a friend. A friend of mine who used to head a particular channel. We were sitting together, and he was showing me his work regarding a graphic novel which he was writing for children. And I started debating with him. I said, all of this looks very, anglicized or Greco-Roman. So, the discussion became heated, and he said, why don't you write? So I said, I'm a policeman, like nobody expects us to write, or anything generally intellectual. Going by the stereotypes, man. So also to break that stereotype. Now he said, why don't you write? I said, fair enough. And I started with a graphic novel. Now my second difficulty came is that nobody was able to render appropriate images. So all of the
Imagery was a challenge.
Imagery was a challenge because everybody was giving me six-pack, metal-clad, Greco-Roman warriors with clean chiseled faces and stuff like that. But when I looked at, let's say, murals from Mathura or from, Magad period, nothing was like that. It was very different. Or let's say the murals of Ajanta, they looked very different. And despite trying for 1 year, I could not get, probably my failure, but I did not get anybody appropriate to draw them out. And then I decided to drop this project. But by the time I had developed so much of interest in this period is just after 100 years after Ashoka. So in those 300-400 years, I studied so much that then somebody said, why don't you write a book? And when I pitched it to a particular, at that time, publication, they were very happy. Somehow the book didn't get published for the next 10 years. Its time was now.
Time was now, and you say that this period is in darkness. What is your biggest discovery in, trying to read upon and then finally publish a book? Of course, a book also has to have a lot of research, has to have a lot of in-depth studies, has to have a lot of references. Where did you draw that from, since you're saying that, that period is almost dark and nobody talks about it? Our references are generally referred to the British historians, etc. So what was the reference point? Where were the referrals coming from? Where did you delve deep upon all of this? And how did it actually take the shape of this novel?
So Nikunj, when I was, looking for original material for this, I came across one inscription, which is called a Hathi Gumfa inscription. This king, Kharvel, has written his own life in 17 lines, right? And he starts with, first year I did this, second year I did this. And at 24 years of age, he was crowned. Before that, he had his, probation period, where he learned arts, administration, espionage, statecraft, taxation, justice, everything. And when I came upon this inscription, then I started digging as to who were his contemporaries. What other parallel sources do I find? So there is a lot of inference in Jain and Buddhist texts about kings, about practices. So you have to piece together, and being a policeman gives you a certain advantage that you know how to put evidence together. So I started building this solid bedrock of, okay, there are gaps in history and it's only interpretation, but still as an investigator, you can understand that you're building a solid bedrock. And I built this across, and then I found something very wonderful, that all of the administration at that time was based on Arthashastra. Then I delved into Arthashastra. I got Sham Shastra edition, I got Kangle's edition. I read everything possible. And I also went to, various Shishupalgarh excavation, Toshali excavation, the Dholi excavation. I went into all this, and there are also secondary edicts. Through this, I understood that what was the geography, how did the city look like, and then put an Arthashastra-based administration on top of that. Now, there are certain terms like Nagarpal and Ayukt which are still used from those times. These are the things which are used still. So there were functions, there was city administration, and there is so much of continuity that it was quite an eye-opener for me. Like if you go slightly before this period, you find that there are 16 democracies in India. And people say democracy, the world has learned democracy from probably Athens. But before Athenian times, there existed 16 Mahajanpads, Anga, Banga, Kalinga, Gaud, Shravasti, Saket, I think. So there were 16 Mahajanpads, which were, Vaishali, which were existing. And this around then 600 BC gets subsumed by Magad, where Nanda Empire, subsumes everything and takes over these. Leading to Chandragupta, and Chandragupta's, descendant Ashok then conquers Kalinga in 261 BC. Now, one more reason for writing this book was that everybody talks about the redemption, the spiritual redemption of Ashok. But we forgot Kalinga there. That there was this land where in those times 1 lakh people were killed. Now, how did that land fare after that? And that's the dark period where nobody talked about. But it's glorious that this empire, Mahameghavanas, this person is probably second or third king of that generation. It's an obscure dynasty, suddenly comes up, and unfortunately it's a short-lived dynasty. Because if this king had lived, it would have been formation of another great empire which would have lasted for centuries. It's a great king who is a patron of arts, who treats everybody properly, treats every religious formation properly, is very kind even in warfare, does public works like kings, and later on even in medieval period you don't see any king doing public works. You see, look at areas around Delhi, very few public works were made even in later periods. But this is a king who's digging canals, who's making tanks, who's planting trees, who's making sarais for people. So it's a beautiful period of a resurgence where a nation builds itself, and it has parallels. See, the way India has developed is that it's a time for resurgence. So there are echoes of resurgence of a country which can be found in this book.
But my question, Mr. Singh, is that why this empire? Why did you zero in on this empire and this land?
Because people have written about various other things. And as I said, that this is a very lesser known, king. But even if you start looking into this lesser known king, let me give you an example. So this man's life dream is that he wants to go back and, conquer Magad, who had defeated and destroyed, right? Nestanabud kiya tha. Now, he wants his redemption. So he decides to go and conquer Magad. By the time he's, moving on Magad, there is an Indo-Bactrian king called Demeter who moves in from the northwest. So this guy decides that, okay, domestic enemies I can tackle later, let me tackle the foreigner first. So there was still a kind of national consciousness, even in warfare. So, this tells about it that India was an entity. Even 2000 years back, India was an entity where even during warfare you said that, okay, this is my neighbor, I'll deal with him later, but let me deal with him first. So this guy goes, defeats Demeter, Demeter goes back, he comes back, and years later he again moves on Magad and does capture it.
And what do you think the lesson here is? Obviously it's a consequential empire, but even such consequential empires have remained out of, let's say, the ambit of the mainstream history that we have been taught, or that is in circulation in this country, or that our children or the future generations are exposed to. So what are the lessons there? Like there's a lot that you're talking about, but there is all this lot does not find any mention anywhere. Most of it probably.
I feel that our primary problem is that, let's say I was yesterday only at some place near Meerut, Tilwara or something, some carts or chariots were discovered. I put it on a group of friends. And the way we Indians start attacking anything which appears to show that there was no Aryan invasion, so that's the standard thought, which is Westerners have thought that Aryans were invaders, or that all warfare was, we learned from others and things like that. So wherever you challenge these narratives, even on the basis of excavations, so this Tilwara place probably has, horses and chariots or carts which are 4,000 years old. Now the irony is that we as Indians, even if somebody tries to tell this to us, we start fighting amongst ourselves because we do not have any ownership of our history. And this is basically resulting from the 1835 Macaulay's Minutes on Education, where he says that all of the Persian and Sanskrit literature and Tamil is not worth one shelf of English literature. And that is what he made us into. See, today we are talking English about our own history and culture, right? So he made us into these brown slaves who were like coconuts, white inside, brown outside. And this also is an attempt to get out of that, to break that coconut,
But let's say that there was this original culture, thought, art, etc. Forever it will not remain hidden. If it was there, if originally something was there. Let's say if Mahabharata was there, obviously there was warfare. Obviously there were advanced practices of warfare because there was chariots, there were kings, and there were empires from that time. And of course, we have living monuments like Purana Kila in Delhi, which talk about empires much before the Mughals came and much before. And if you see the trajectory also, it remains the same area of development where even the later kings founded their empires, etc. So quite clearly, if it is there, it can be discovered, it can be rediscovered, it can be positioned, and it can be placed in public conscience. Do you think that that attempt is being made, or that more needs to be done around it, or that its stage will come when people will feel pride in owning all of this instead of dismissing it as probably you are indicating it?
First of all, I think there is a need to identify this gap. We have to understand that we don't have to take as gospel truth whatever has been told to us about our past, that we need to understand, we need to build tools to interpret. So our historiography is not our own. And once we develop this understanding, then we can decide what we want to study. Not everything is good about history, right? History has been brutal and barbaric and, cold-blooded.
And about history, they say that history is a set of lies agreed upon.
Yes,
so
indeed.
So obviously there would be, counter challenges always in a historical narrative.
But look, with the modern anthropological tools and with dating, carbon dating, paleo dating, you can get to a much more accurate version of history today. Like there are methods wherein you can go across silt. So you go across silt in lakes, very old lakes, let's say Chilka, Sambar, let's say cut a deep borehole there, then there are layers. And in each layer, you can find out what is the pollen, what must have been the rainfall. So there are a lot of inferences which come out of that. And these can then be, modeled upon into history. With use of AI today, I think you would be able to much better understand. For example, let's say that if a population has to be supported, what would be the amount of water required? What would be the agriculture required? How these people would sustain? Or to keep a standing army, what percentage of your national income
revenue would go into
a standing army? Because a standing army is a very, very expensive thing. But wherever you would have had empires, you would have had to have standing armies. Apart from that, the need for weaponry, the need for tradecraft, the need for even implements of warfare. So were there enough mines? Was there enough smelting? Did you have those kinds of karigars who could make this? Thankfully, you have enough references. Now, the Arthashastra mentions it very well in different kinds of crafts and craftsmen and guilds of craftsmen and how they interacted with the state. So this I have tried to build in a very immersive way. Now, had I had written a book on history, everybody would have said that, who are you to write a book on history? But see, fiction gives you that advantage, that I can create an immersive experience where you see Rudravarman going and standing at the gates of Toshali, and then I start to describe. And those roads are from Arthashastra. Arthashastra tells you what is a village road, how many carts can go on it, what is the pavement, right? Even for defenses, there are details. So I have tried to take details from Arthashastra, put it on a period, tried to match it with excavation, inscriptions, details from religious scriptures, and so on and so forth, so that in the end, I give you a complete immersive experience of those times.
So you think that, this fiction is closer to the history, or history is closer to the fiction?
The only character that you see in the book, the protagonist, is kind of an anachronism, because Varmans don't come for many hundred years after this time. But anyways, I'm kind of fixated with the character Rudra, because Rudra is also a character in my first book, Quantum Siege. So Rudra is a police officer there, so somehow I kept the name. But otherwise, I have tried to maintain historical accuracy wherever possible. For example, I have calculated for warfare, how much would an ancient army move? So there are metrics by which you can calculate that, okay, with these kinds of implements, this kind of weight, this kind of people, how much would they move? And I have actually, for all this warfare, drawn mathematical formulae. So it's very, very near to history in a very scientific routing, and it addresses the need to shine light on periods which have remained dark and which need to be explored, so that, at least we know whether they were good, they were bad, whether we should emulate them, whether we should have pride about them, is up to us.
Yes, and also my question is that, do you think that fiction, probably being easier to read, has the capacity to reach more people, larger audiences, larger set of people, and consequently arouse the interest that probably dry history will not, and so that people can get more excited about those periods and talk about those periods, and consequently somehow find some evidence to relate to those periods?
See, storytelling is a very powerful archetype. Like Jung talks about this kind of archetypical subconscious figures, and history is a very prominent part of our storytelling. And I've seen that even when I go to scientific conferences, I speak a lot on cyber, and if I start telling a story, what happened that day, and I find that the audience interest changes. And I find that storytelling being a fundamental need, write it, and we have traditions of storytelling. And when you went to your nanny's home in summer, she would tell you stories. And this need tied up with an understanding that we need to understand history. And somewhere I see a stirring of national consciousness today, where people want to know about the past and people want to understand it themselves, and not through the eyes of Western historians or some other historians who may have had certain motives in writing history or a twist in writing that history. So it is just to kind of open source the history. That, okay, this is like this is my interpretation, go and challenge it, build upon it, find it out, go on your own journey and expedition. So the whole idea is to spur this thought, is to basically ask people to say that, okay, here I have picked up something which you didn't know, look at it, find it out, maybe, try and refute me, but for that you will have to study that. And once you do that, you would know much more about yourselves. You would discover things about yourselves, about the great stream of consciousness and culture which has been flowing through this land for thousands of years.
And possibly, also get more interested in your own roots and history.
Absolutely.
As individuals today who are constantly seeking validation or direction from the West.
That's true. See, I say this, that you look at your phone, all the apps somewhere have been coded by Indian engineers, but none of us is owned by us, because somewhere we feel secondary to the world. That you talk to Indian, startups, that they're exceptionally good, but they can't productize it very well, because somewhere we have been kind of emasculated by history. So this long period of subjugation does this to you. Colonization does this to you. So we need to decolonize ourselves. We need to decolonize and reclaim our history. Only then we would, we are poised to be at the world stage. And here it is a time when we need to also reunite with our past and feel the greatness that existed on this land.
Mr. Brijesh Singh, thank you, and very nice speaking to you on a different topic compared to your usual, interest area of cyber security. And thank you very much for coming on NDTV.
Thank you so much.